Kwa sasa tusikize anayosema Gavana wa Benki Kuu Patrick Njoroge anazungumza na wanahabari kuhusiana na hali ya uchumi humu nchini.
Material. So again, it's precautionary, but the effort here is not so much to the arrangement itself. It's actually more to do our policies, and that I think we have already had some discussions about, meaning earlier this morning and also here. The question about monetary policy, monetary and fiscal policy to prepare for shocks. The idea here is to have more space to use fiscal policies, meaning when there's a shock. And therefore what you need to, today and now there's very little space in order to, if there's a shock. Fiscal policy, if it became, let's say, accommodative, it would very quickly run into the problems that we discussed a moment ago, debt and others. So the point is to consolidate, so like to be in the middle of the road, so that you can go either way. And the same with monetary policy, so as to be in the middle of the road and you can escape either way if a shock comes. So that's really the essence of it. And in the case of monetary policy, at this moment, obviously, it's not that accommodative. So it means we may need to move to rebalance, become more accommodative on monetary and consolidate more in fiscal, and then both will end up being more or less in the middle of the road.
Good, thank you. I think my question was about revenue estimates. And yes, the revenue figures that we had when we presented the budget to Parliament were based on projected revenue performance for 2018-19. When the actual figures came in September, there was a shortfall of about 90 billion. So again, based on the methodology that we use to forecast revenue, we had to now input the actuals, not the forecast numbers, and that's what gave the revision. And please, let me emphasize, it is not this time, we do this all the time. The only reason why you saw it very early is because as part of our budgeting, we had to go back and realign the full budget in line with the Big Four agenda. And that will come in a supplementary very soon. That's why we see those revisions now. Normally we do them, but we don't publish until much later when we have a supplementary, but now we're going to be having it very soon. So again, to emphasize, it is not this year alone. We do that all the time. When the variables that we use to forecast revenue change, we revise.
Next round, but this is the last round, given that it's 1 minute past 12. My hands, please. We're starting there. Before we come to second round questions, let's start with Gezo and last first. So hold.
Dominic Omondi from The Standard. My question is perhaps it can be answered by either the Governor or Mr. Mwao. Kenya has seen, of course, very good growth. GDP growth has averaged around 5.5% there for the last 5 years. However, one thing that is coming is that NPLs are also growing. And there are reports from other countries in Africa which show that with growth, NPLs normally go down. But Kenya has interesting correlation where NPLs are growing. What is happening?
Right. Brenda?
Okay.
Brenda Kirubo, KTN News. This question can be addressed by the three of you. My grandmother at home, or my mother, my much elderly mother, is seated at home and is looking at the IMF numbers. And it's talking about revised economic growth projections. Why would she care? Because, 3 months or 1 year ago, the money she was spending or getting back in return from her business is much smaller. Why should she care about what IMF is talking about? And in the sense that economic growth is meant to deliver jobs, return on investment, and higher tax revenues, is this a situation, especially for the Governor on the ground, because you're having more companies issuing profit warnings and at the same time and also, people are losing jobs. And there seemed to be a push from the IMF indicating that, more taxes could be the way to go as an outlook basis. Would you like to clarify on this, please? Thank you.
Right here at the front.
Good. My name is Mariam from Horizon TV. It's good she asked one of the questions that I wanted to ask. My question is directed to Dr. Mwao. You spoke about the public debt rising because of borrowing that is financing infrastructure, roads, water, energy, among others. And you also said that there are measures that you've put forth that will actually reduce borrowing. Could you clarify that and tell us what measures are these that you're probably putting forth to reduce borrowing in Kenya?
I think is there any other question? Yeah, I'll come to you. No. So, you're one and that's it. Anyone else?
Just very quickly, I guess either the Governor or Dr. Mwao as well, you can answer. My question is about interest rate caps. What is the expectation of the government on that? Do you expect that they'll be lifted by the end of the year? Thank you.
We can start with Dr. Mwao and come this way, because the microphone is facing you.
Okay. Let me start with the last question here about borrowing. I think what I was saying is that we need to focus more on concessional borrowing because it's much easier to bear the burden of concessional borrowing. And what we are doing is looking at scaling down our commercial borrowing up to a point where it is manageable. Of course, that will not happen in 1 year. But over time, if you look at our fiscal consolidation path, in the next 3 years we'll be in a very comfortable level in terms of borrowing. But the key, as I said there, is really to focus on revenue so that we don't need to borrow more. So the key is to ensure that we collect the taxes that are due, not raising taxes, but just collecting what is due to the tax collector. Then,
Thank you. 3 questions. First, the issue of NPLs. I don't know. It depends on how much time you have. I mean, we could discuss this all day. But the point is, in general terms, you do have NPLs does follow the economy inversely, meaning the cyclical changes in the economy. So when the economy is booming, generally the ratios, and you're talking NPLs by as a share or as a percentage of loans, credit in general, that will generally go down because credit is booming, right? So that's what you are referring to. But it's not that it's not happening here. It's true there is that trend. And we have talked a lot about where the NPLs are and what is driving those NPLs. And last time, you remember, we did say that they've come down marginally. And as the economy begins to pick up strongly, we would expect this to continue going down. And in that context, we did even tell you which sectors, and we even told you the large, let's say, NPLs that are there and how they're being resolved and so forth. So bottom line is that NPLs should not be the concern, meaning they should be addressed directly. And one of the things that the government has actually made payments on pending bills. I'm a bit surprised nobody asked that question in the other discussion. I mean, a lot of money was paid by the central government, national government, on pending bills to clear the pending bills sometime in June, July. But there are also other bills that are there that lead to the NPLs. I mean, the counties also have pending bills that need to be cleared, and so forth. And there's also private sector to private sector thing. So I think the point here is the evolution of NPLs is not such a concern in the context of what is happening now, meaning it's being addressed directly. So that's the short answer. Profit warnings, Brenda was asking about what should her show, so what's her perspective? And I think this is the point I tried to get at in the context of inclusive growth. It's true that you have numbers, right? You have debt, GDP numbers. And as you have said, you can't eat GDP. At the end of the day, what is needed is specific products, specific incomes. That is what your show and anybody else wants. I mean, the jobs that person who's trading actually does go and make a profit and all those other things. So I think the point here is that even as we were talking about the macro numbers, there's all the details, the granularity beneath it, which obviously we began addressing in particular ways, right? This is why we talked about making sure that the losers are somehow dealt with. That's why we also say that sectoral composition of debt, growth is important, because if it is just driven by infrastructure, that doesn't quite provide so much income until how avocados are exported and whatever else it is. So that is really the connection. She needs to care, but not because it is 6% or 6.5 and all that. At the end of the day, it is what really hits her, hits her pocketbook. So I think there's a conversation there, but let me leave there in the interest of time. You talked about, may I talk about the interest rate cuts? And then, okay, very briefly again, interest rate cuts. I think you know exactly where it is. The president has sent back the finance bill to Parliament, making a point with a memoranda indicating that they need to deal with the interest rate caps because it is negative, it's affecting the economy negatively. And that's really the bottom line. So what happens next is in Parliament's court, meaning Parliament can agree with the president and then we'll be okay with that. But I think